Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Our topic today is maximizing resource efficiency and time tracking in Project for the Web using OnePlan. Resource management is always a top of mind topic for our clients that we see out there in the marketplace. And we want to talk about how using Project for the Web in conjunction with OnePlan can give you the ultimate in a project and portfolio management solution that addresses these resource aspects. So let's talk a little bit about resource management and what it is. For the purposes of our discussion today, from a resource management 101 kind of definition, it is the efficient and effective deployment and allocation of an organization's resources when and where they are needed. The benefits of actually doing this at all include things like, better resource visibility, increasing business value because we're actually maybe getting the right resources on the right things that are going to drive the most value for the organization. We can also save time and money becoming more efficient at this process and be able to make sure that we're not wasting resources on things that might be duplicate or things that might not be driving the right value for the organization. It can also increase project success rates because if we have an eye on our capacity at all times, we may not blindly make commitments to projects that we can't fulfill on as planned because the fact that the resource bandwidth just isn't there. And we can also better accommodate demand because we can actually give people realistic expectations when they put requests in. What is it that we can do and when we can do it? And then not least importantly is employee satisfaction. If we don't have good resource management and we overburden resources on a regular basis, we can really decrease employee satisfaction to the point where we might even end up having high turnover. And we don't want that with resources we've invested in and have the skill sets to do what we need. So what are some of the common resource management challenge areas that we see? One is resource ownership. In today's world, there's still highly matrixed organizations where there's a project organization and project management. And then there's the functional organizations that actually manage and have the resources at their disposal. And we have to have some type of, let's just say, reconciliation and negotiation to make sure that the right resources get to the right projects as they're needed. Resource focus. With all the demand that we come in, and most organizations have more demand than they can actually accommodate, how do the resources know when they get assigned different things that are beyond their bandwidth, what should be the priorities and what should their focus be? Non-project workload. It's not a unlimited supply of time. And oftentimes people get given break fix or operational work that's non-project or administrative in its nature that impacts their bandwidth and their ability to allocate their time towards that project direct type of work. Resource tracking. How do we know, just because we planned where somebody's going to be working, how do we know where they're actually spending their time and how much progress that time is actually yielding for us? And then there's resource visibility. Being able to understand at any point, at any given point in time, where we're at on that, what resources are being consumed, what resources have yet to be consumed, what is the forecast for what is going to be needed in order to deliver successfully on our commitments. And then the resource reporting. Can we get the reporting that we need so that at any given point in time, not only us that working in a resource management system can see these things, but what about our stakeholders and our internal and external customers? Can we get the reporting to them that they need to get a good gauge on where we're at? And then too much information. Resource management is very granular at times, a lot of time-phased information, which can be very voluminous in the amount of data that we're dealing with and the increments of that data. And sometimes it's so much data that it drowns out its use as true decision support data that we can use as information to help us make better decisions. So see, these are some of the challenges that we see out there today. These are by no means all of the challenges. Now, resource management steps that organizations can take, as we look at this picture with stepping stones, might be early on and first and foremost, deal with our resource capacity, getting a handle on what we have as far as capacity of resources and the types of resources and roles that we have. Resource allocation then becomes the specific people with those roles in that capacity and be able to allocate them in a granular fashion to specific projects or even down to specific task levels if we want to do things from a project schedule or a work item perspective. And then getting on to resource work management is where we start effectively factoring in what people's non-work as well as their non-project work as well as their project-specific work is. Now, team formation and personal productivity really gets to the maturity step where, especially in these more agile times where we have dedicated teams, that team formation and the dynamics of those teams and making them more and more efficient over time and more productive and more skilled as a team is something that it's an evolution and then helps us get better at delivering. Then personal productivity is really taking that level and say, what is our own aspect of it and how do we make the individual more productive within the context of a resource management system? So the maturity dimensions, which we have to really factor in where we're at as an organization from a resource management maturity perspective, and then build a plan for where we're at, how we stretch the organization to do better, and then ultimately maybe a roadmap of where we'd like to get, what our aspirations are. In that regard, we might just start very early on, planning on by different resource roles generically and say, we need these developers, or we need these business analysts, we need these project managers, or we may have at a high level the actual individual resources that we are named specific people that fit into those roles. What is the right level of granularity for where we're at today? What can we sustain? The planning and tracking granularity. Do we do this at a high level project level and basically say I need a business analyst, for example, on a project for this percentage of their time over this period? Or am I putting specific people on to specific tasks very granularly and rolling that data up if I have a confidence that people can actually reliably estimate at that level and do that across the board, across all of our projects and all of our project managers? Approval and negotiation, as I mentioned, that matrix type of organization. Do we have the right things in place so that we can actually have projects say, this is what I need as far as resource types? And then go to the resource and functional organizations and have them be able to tell us, yes, these are the people you can have, and this is for how long you can have them, and be able to agree and negotiate on that. Governance and prioritization. It's not just about the resources themselves. It's about the intake of the work and that demand, and being able to have a process in place where we decide the prioritization and what it is we'd like to work on as an organization, and then layer in onto that the resource realities of what we have and determining based on the combination of those things what it is that we can do. Forecasting versus actuals. Some organizations just take the look ahead. They just want to understand, do I have the resources and the things that are coming up to do those things? The past is the past. And other people want to track actuals and be able to understand where the resources actually were spent historically, so that possibly we can do things for, CapEx and OpEx accounting. Whether it be able to justify to our internal and external customers why we're charging or billing them, et cetera. So those are things that we might want to do in determining what approach we're going to take for resource management. And then there's resource costing. Our resources can have rates associated with them so that we can generate financial reporting and financial information based upon this resource planning. So these are all maturity dimensions that we want to consider. What can we tackle today? What is our stretch goal for what we could possibly sustain now if we just extend ourselves a little bit? And then ultimately, where do we think we can get to as an organization, factoring in our culture and other factors? Now, I talked about, top-down maybe versus bottom-up type of resourcing. And early on, organizations may do more capacity planning from the top down, where I was describing at a project level, not down to detailed task, for example, what it is we need. And basically saying at that level, here is what we think we're going to use, maybe even track what we are using or what we have used at that level, but not go any lower than that. Organizations that are starting from very immature or very emerging resource management processes find this is a level of detail that might be good for them to forecast initially to get a sanity check of what the reality is about resources, to make sure in general that we're not over allocating our people. Now, the bottom up might be, all right, now we've got detailed project schedules or work plans, and we're assigning people to specific tasks or work elements, and that information is all rolling up on a time phase basis to give us that resource plan that we have from a very granular perspective. Now, many organizations aren't ready to do that yet, but some organizations do a combination of those two things. They might only do bottoms up, or they might only do top down, but some maybe do top down early on in the life cycle of a project, And then when they do actually have a detailed schedule, roll that up and possibly even compare those two things such that here was our assumption from the top down very early on. This is what the detailed schedule says the actual plan is, and then see how much we vary from those things and reconcile accordingly. Now, resource management from a resource-only perspective doesn't make sense unless you really combine it at times with your overall portfolio management. They should be done together. If you look at this bottom in the blue, where from a resource management perspective, we might identify the generic roles we have, determine the quantity of each resource that we have, identify constraining resources or maybe our bottleneck type of resources, and et cetera. And then we start getting into an intersection. So if we look at the gray at the top, which might be an overall portfolio process that starts with intake on ideas and requests, we might entertain those. We might review business cases and decide on a go, no-go basis, do we want to do this? And if we do want to do this, we might want to propose a portfolio of things we'd like to do. But this is where it intersects with, do we actually have the resources to accomplish the things we would like to do? And as it gets assessed, it may need to go to a governance or steering committee where they really have to match that high level demand or aspiration with the supply of resources we can realistically apply, and then come up with a portfolio that's a balance of those things so that we can have a realistic chance of delivering. And then we end up with the resource allocations that we need that might hopefully be in alignment with our ability to deliver. So in understanding resource capacity, we really want to look at, how many people do I have that can work on projects? And for how much time are they available? What is their project specific bandwidth that they have? And what roles can they play in that process? From a demand perspective, we really, from a project perspective, need to determine what resources are required for each project and what types, and then prioritize those projects and then allocate those resources based on the role and the priority of the projects until the resource capacity is exhausted. Now, in a more mature landscape, you might want to develop projects based on committed availability, meaning when the functional organization says, this is who you can have and for how long and how much you can have them. Like, for example, you can have, John for 25% of his time for a 3-month period. Then you built a plan based upon that committed availability. Or you don't start projects until resources are available. If they're unavailable, you don't start those projects, nor do you commit those projects until you have a clear understanding that you can deliver the projects themselves. Now, many are doing this in Excel today because it's something that's freely available. They all know how to use it, and they're unaware maybe of viable alternatives for them to use. Now, that's great, and it tackles the problem of that resource-only dimension, but why are there problems with this? One, it generally lacks standards. It can be very individual in its nature to do something organization-wide. It is a very manual and static model. It's easy to break formulas and calculations that are in there, and there's no dynamic visibility of resource capacity necessarily of what we really have and what we're trying to allocate. It's very time-consuming, cell by cell, row by row, when things change, especially on a time phase basis. And it's not connected to anything else. It's really not connected to your project management or your project execution from a work and portfolio perspective, meaning it's not a combined set of information. Hence, the visibility and insight for overall reporting is not easily gained without a lot of manual data crunching. So that governance process that I mentioned in the portfolio management, and potentially if you want to even do strategic alignment to make sure that, are we putting the resources to the right projects based upon the company's priorities? That's really not there with an Excel model on a resource-only basis. So let's talk about, Microsoft Project for the Web and how this factors in and how this might contribute to an overall resource management process. Those of you that are Microsoft shops and have used Microsoft Project in the past, Microsoft Project in the desktop, Microsoft Project for the Web is designed to do a few things. It's designed to be a more simple web-based interface instead of a heavy Windows client application, but they're designed to provide the same scheduling types of capability, but make it more accessible to everyone, more simple to use. Now, for example, here in this view, you can see that I'm working with this thing here in a Kanban board, or in a list like a grid or like a spreadsheet, or working with the data in a timeline or a Gantt chart view like we're used to seeing in Microsoft Project. The idea here is to make it simple, make it accessible, and make it quick for people to ramp up without a lot of training. So Microsoft Project for the Web is designed to provide a scheduling tool that provides a fresh, new, modern experience, makes collaboration easy by incorporating teams, by giving the ability, like the rest of Office, to allow you to do co-authoring of these plans so you can collaborate with other people dynamically, and just give you methods to do more intelligent planning on this new innovative platform, which we'll talk about. So Project for the Web allows you to do your scheduling as you're used to seeing to do that. What does that mean from a resource management perspective? Well, you build your tasks or your Gantt charts or your work breakdown structures. You then estimate the effort required on those things, and then you actually allocate or assign resources to the individual tasks or work items and have that roll up to an overall resource requirement for that particular project. Very simply, the focus here is really on the schedule itself. Also, in this modern tool, it is a Microsoft Teams application, meaning you can incorporate these project plans into any of your teams and then be able to do collaboration on things like your posts and your file content, and actually work with the project schedule directly here within Teams, and also use it in context of a hub of other project management applications you might want to incorporate into the same team, meaning you're not task switching all over the place, that everything might be all contained within that project from a collaborative perspective. Now, if we think about, Project for the Web, and then think about OnePlan, our solution that really adds and complements Project for the Web to a complete strategic portfolio management solution that includes robust resource management, let's look at this from a building block perspective. Project for the Web in the green here allows you to create individual projects and plans. It allows you to add tasks and create project schedules, assign resources to tasks, put your dependencies on and schedule those, and even have project reporting. There's a native content pack or report pack for Power BI that gives you reporting on the schedule and assignment information that you have within your Project for the Web plans. But if you're thinking about overall resource management in conjunction with portfolio management, which we stated was an important combination, it's really having a tool like OnePlan in the blue here to add all these additional capabilities that you might want and need. For example, intake and project requests, strategy that aligns with those things, advanced portfolio management capabilities, including prioritization and what-if analysis, the financial detail tracking and resource capacity planning, as well as other things you might want to track like issues, risks, changes, being able to have a timesheet that people can actually put their actuals against and be able to track actuals about how we're doing against your projects. So in this particular mode, what we're going to focus on today is only a subset of this. OnePlan has a rich set of capabilities that incorporates the use of Project for the Web, but today we're going to focus on the resource capacity and the timesheet perspective of that and how that all works. And we do this with native productized connectors. And the one we're going to focus on today is its connection with Project for the Web, but different work management tools, software development, agile tools like Azure DevOps or Jira, or your financial management tools or other service management tools, for example, even Viva Goals from Microsoft, from a strategy perspective. These are things that can be connected into this OnePlan mix that we're going to talk about here today. So OnePlan really provides a platform for connecting strategy to execution and all the things in between. And in this picture depiction we see on the right-hand side, OnePlan is sitting at the top of this pyramid, and down below there might be a whole series of Project for the Web plans that are out there that are being created by different folks in your organization. But the connection to that is bringing in a complete portfolio into OnePlan and allow us to do all the other capabilities around those Project for the Web plans that we might need, including resource management, resource capacity, and time reporting. So high level OnePlan overall capabilities, portfolio planning and visibility, whether they be traditional list views, whether they be more board views for the more agile oriented type of people, or maybe roadmap views so that we can see how these things on a roadmap basis for more product oriented delivery type of organizations, including what-if analysis and modeling in here for these portfolios. The resource capacity planning with detailed time-phased resource plans to help us understand at any given point where we're over allocating, and even deriving some of that resource information in financials so that we can understand our labor costs and even other financials around that. Now, we have a home for both waterfall work plans and more agile backlogs and agile plans. But in this particular case, our connectors will allow you to bring into that mix data from Project for the Web, or even Microsoft Project Desktop for that perspective, or even from Azure DevOps perspective, and be able to have consistent status reporting and data collection with those plans being incorporated into the overall mix. Now, the other part of our webinar is about that individual contributor that has to report time or status. So OnePlan also provides a comprehensive My Work area that you see on the lower left that allows them to not only status the tasks that have been assigned to them across all the projects that they're working on, but also provide a timesheet that's available for them to report time as your organization may need to report time for various purposes. So if we think about combining this, OnePlan will provide that portfolio visibility and a portfolio or set a complete portfolio or portfolios if you have multiple ones, but also incorporate a variety of tools, including Project for the Web, into that mix. We can then incorporate prioritization mechanisms into that, where you might have scoring and other criteria-based selection process, where we want to select projects and prioritize them based upon the things that are most important to our business drivers, etc. And then even for the agile people, be able to drag and drop boards and bring things into the mix and prioritize them that way and try to figure out, does it fit in with the overall resource capacity in that perspective? Or just build this up from a resource capacity plan within each project. So each project, you might decide generically what I need for project managers or what I need specific people-wise to do that, and build detailed resource estimates in each project. And this can happen from idea all the way through execution. It can be planned in hours or full-time equivalents or percentages of allocation. And it actually always looks at existing demand of existing commitments while you're planning and allow you the ability to do resource negotiations. Now, if we roll all that up and on a project by project basis want to look across the entire organization, we can then see what everybody's assigned to or what everybody's allocated to and get a high level view of capacity and demand at any given point in time and look what's been already committed before we give them yet another piece of work. And it's easy for us to find substitutions and do resource balancing, which we'll demonstrate today. And then if we combine that portfolio management with that resource management, when we do what-if analysis, we can actually look at the combination of what it is we want to do, when we want to do it, and what that means down below from a resource perspective, and say different alternatives as scenarios within OnePlan. And the modeler really allows us to just capture different models with different criteria and different constraints, and even compare all the different options that we have. Now, timesheets is a part of what we're going to talk about here today, and bringing in together all these different projects and even the work items on those projects and bringing them into a comprehensive timesheet where people can easily record and report back where they've spent their time to the organization for whatever purpose that might be, whether it might be for capitalization, whether it might be for chargebacks, whether it be for billing to other people outside the organization. And then ultimately, because all this data is in one hub now, not just in separate spreadsheets and different scheduling tools and brought into one place, the reporting across all this becomes much more comprehensive and much more rich. So we can look at dynamic resource reporting and analytics. The other part of it is that OnePlan is designed so that you can just work with it in a browser, and that's the way we'll primarily show it to you today. But if you're incorporating the use of, say, Power Apps and want to incorporate the OnePlan capabilities we're going to show you here today and surface it in Power Apps, you can definitely make that your user experience. It fuses in very nicely. It's also a authorized Microsoft Teams application, so you can actually look at that as well, right through Teams, and incorporate that into any team or in Teams in general. We can also surface it in Azure DevOps, in Dynamics, and in SharePoint, and we actually have a newly designed mode to work with it with Viva Goals as well. So with that, I would like to go to an overall demonstration of some of these tools in action. So let's just look at Project for the Web for the moment and look at a particular project home. If you just use it by itself, you get a project home like this, which is really like you'd get in Office itself with any other tools like Word or Excel, where it's giving you your most recent, what's shared with you, what's been created by you, and even lets you favorite some things in here as far as different projects that you might want. If I drill into a specific project plan, just to give you an example of that, Creating a new project is as simple as giving the project a name in these properties for this particular project in here, when you want it to start, etc., and just start from there. And from there, you can start building tasks in here. In this case, I'm looking at an overall work breakdown structure. I've got tasks that are showing me what's been completed. I can simply check the box for what's completed. I can give it start and finish dates. I can actually assign resources to this to make sure I understand who's going to be working on what tasks. And I can even give them resource effort estimates and even dependencies that we might want to see. We can even label or categorize these things for other types of what we call buckets or other views in here that aggregate this data in a number of different ways. The idea here from a resource management perspective, it's like doing it in Project Desktop, for example, is that you're creating work items, you're assigning people or resources to work items, and then you're rolling up that data into an overall plan from that bottom-up perspective. Now, you could also look at the project for the web data in a board. In this case, I'm looking at, let me say, a group by progress. What we have that's not been started, what's in progress, what's completed, and drag those things through. From a resource management perspective, I could look at this and say, okay, who's assigned to what? And look at that same plan, but say, okay, show me which of these things are on Daniel Williams' plate. Be able to look at this from a Kanban board perspective and also see stuff we haven't assigned to anybody yet and look at that into the mix as well. We could even look at these things by, various buckets and labels. For example, if I wanted to look at that by, how we're looking at this and who, what, labels have been assigned to what tasks, as well as even things like look at priorities that we've given things. So what's urgent, important, medium, and whatever else we'd like to, incorporate into this mix. There's also a timeline view. So if we want to look at this from a traditional Gantt chart perspective, we can look at the same data, look at this and drag and drop and provide these task-based, plans the way we see fit. And like Planner, this will allow you to look at different charts of data regarding some of the information around that, some people information independent of the schedule piece that we're looking at that's aggregated here with some progress about what we've completed, what's late, and that type of things in our plans. And even, across that mix, I can even go down and get a view on overall resource assignments and see Daniel Williams, what he's been assigned to over what days or weeks that we're looking at across the board. So that information is there. But once again, this is about an individual schedule. This is information on an individual project plan and doesn't look at the resource management from an overall aggregate perspective. Okay. Now, from a Power BI perspective, you could look at these reports and, we could come in and see some information regarding that aggregated up from the individual project plans. And there is a report pack for that. But the resources really is, it's not as granular as some people would want as far as the days they would like, but it will roll up, for example, me understanding Daniel Williams and telling me how much of his bandwidth is on each of these projects, for example. Or I might look at individual resource assignments at a task level and at least take a look and see, what is Joe assigned to, or what is Steve McGarrett assigned to across different projects and things like that, and what his completion status is. But sometimes the quantification of time, phase, capacity versus demand requires a little bit more information than that. So with that, I would like to go to a OnePlan environment. And in this OnePlan environment, what you'll see is we have connections right here to a bunch of project for the web plans. So the schedules that are coming into this information, into this portfolio, are being driven by data that's connected to project for the web. And in this particular case, that's something that gives us a perspective of how many projects are in here, but we have a lot more dimensions of project work, project information that we can deal with here. But let's talk about flexible portfolio views first. For example, in this list, I'm just looking at an overall portfolio summary that's giving me, KPIs of how we're doing on health and some high-level information on when we're going to finish and progress and that type of thing. So that information here is available to me as I see fit. But I can have other list views in here, for example. So from a resource management oriented perspective, I could look at something like this, where I'm looking at not only the projects, but in this case, they're grouped by business unit, or they could be grouped by whatever data you're capturing around this in the portfolio, however you categorize your projects, and view these projects and what the committed effort is versus what's been spent, and what kind of variances we might have, et cetera. And that gives us the ability to look at, all that type of information very readily. There's also the ability to, look at this in a hierarchy. So we have the concept of plan types. So in this particular model, we have programs within projects within the programs. And if I wanted to look at that from that perspective, and I wanted to look at more of a program summary, what you'll see here is I now have a hierarchy where I have programs of which they might be carrying their own data, which can roll up data from the various member projects that are in them and basically have things like their own program budgets and things like that. OnePlan brings this capability to the mix. There's also board views like I discussed. And in those board views, you might be looking at things, say, in this case, by business unit. And this, I have the different business units here that we're doing different projects for. We might even have a backlog of things that we want to consider pulling into the active mix if we wanted to as well. We also have the ability in the board view to add lanes into these columns. So for example, I could take this these lanes and say, let me look at this by, say, program goals. And in this particular case, I've got a customer satisfaction goal where I have one project in operations that's being done. I got grow the business that's being done by IT, etc. I'm going to run the business goal that's being done by both product development and operations. So once again, we have flexibility there on the way we'd like to look at this. And very quickly you can save other goals, like say goals by program. And you can take a look at how we're doing those in different perspectives as well. And I mentioned really quickly the roadmap views. And those roadmap views, if I look at this, say by, by business unit, I can look at them by business unit, or I can look at them by priority or whatever other data elements that I have in here. So I can factor that into the mix if I want this kind of visual. Now, if I go back to the list views and I go back to the project summary where I originally started in this demonstration, what you'll see here is a list of these projects that I have. But what other data do we have around these projects that I could work with? So let me just drill into the 401k enhancements project. And if I drill down to find that one and I drill into that, what you'll see is, let's start out in the project details. This gives us the ability, on top of what's in your schedule or your project plan, the ability for this project to capture any number of pieces of data or metadata to characterize or categorize your project, the ability to put, say, for example, a life cycle or a phase or gate flow against these things, the ability to summarize your financials, your resource information, and even your KPIs, and even narratives around things about business case you might have captured. So this is very flexible to add a level of portfolio data that you wouldn't have in a project for the web schedule by itself. Now, if I go in and look at the resource aspect of this, to focus on the resource management dimension, we now have associated with this project plan, which is here, a resource capacity plan. And with this resource capacity plan, you'll notice that I have a committed plan, which is more of a top-down plan. Now I'm showing it in here of hours, and I've got Daniel Williams and Steve McGarrett allocated here. And I can even toggle this to say, okay, what does this mean in terms of FTEs? And I can see that we have red here, and it's not because they're red within this particular project. Notice that I only have him here 94 or 82% of his time on this project here specifically, but notice he has other pieces of work that are associated with him that are giving him an over allocation in general. So it always has its eye on the other projects or other work efforts that are going on within the mix. If I wanted to look at this and then say, well, what alternatives might I have? I could come into something like this and say, let me find some candidates to replace this over allocated Daniel Williams on here. And if I look at this and open up the candidates list and I go to find some matches for resources that could possibly do this, I can see that I have a Tom McPherson who has a lot of bandwidth that I could possibly replace Daniel with. So for example, I could take Tom and I could say, let me replace Tom on this. And then basically allows me to say, okay, now I have Tom who's not over allocated here. I've got Daniel who's less over allocated overall down here, and I may have solved that problem. Or maybe I didn't want to do that. Maybe I just wanted to go down here and I want to, pick up Tom, and maybe I'll take Tom and I'll replace Tom and I'll put Daniel Williams back on there for the moment and just say I want to replace that resource in here, and I can basically say, oops, I picked more than one resource. and let me replace. And then I'll just go back and put back the way we were. So the idea is it's very easy to do that type of resource balancing in this case. Now, we also have different resource types in here, resource plan types. So this committed is more that top-down plan, is just saying at this project level, what do we need in terms of FTEs or hours over what period of time? Now, we also have a scheduled work type that allows me to look at the work items that come in from the detailed schedule. And we'll look at that in a second. But we can see Daniel Williams from the bottoms up has these 3 tasks or work items that are rolling up into his overall capacity from the bottom up. And what's nice about this is I could take, for example, the committed plan, what I originally thought, and I can actually compare that top-down plan to what's in the schedule and see the variation. For example, I thought I was going to need him 94% of his bandwidth in February, but the schedule is saying I'm only going to need him 78% of his time. I thought I was going to need him 82% of his time, but I'm using him 101% of his time here in March. So the idea is that there's the ability to compare both top down and bottom up, or do each one individually. So from an individual resource plan, the bottom up stuff is actually coming from a work plan that you can have within here. In this particular case, this is a simple work plan that's rolling up some tasks that Daniel Williams is the only one assigned to tasks on in here, and that's rolling into that bottom-up schedule that we talked about. And this plan, as we'll show in a little bit, is actually coming from a connection to a project for the web plan that's bringing that data in automatically. And we'll go into more detail on that shortly. So with that, I'm going to transition to another model, and I'm going to go into a strategic portfolio management demo. And this is going to show me another little slight dimension on this. So for example, if I look at the portfolio in this particular model, what you're going to see is, instead of being homogenously all project for the web, though we have project for the web data in here, okay, there's other tools that could be bringing in data. So for example, bringing in things from, say, Azure DevOps, or from Project Desktop, or from SharePoint, or other tools like that. Those could be the source for some of the detailed schedule data that's in there, as well as connections to team sites that might be available to this. Now, if I drill into a particular plan that was project for the web specific, let me find. Here's a project for the web plan. And if I drill into this particular plan, and I go into the work plan for this particular project, and I have a view of the project schedule that's here, and I go and look at, for example, that this is connected to a project for the web plan, I can actually go from this place and open up the item in project for the web that this source data came from, that's rolling up into the portfolio here in OnePlan. So this project for the web plan, you can do all your planning in here if this is your chosen scheduling tool to do that. And then you can actually look at that stuff in conjunction with what's going on in the rest of the portfolio. So for example, here, if I go in here, you'll notice I have a plan in here that is being derived from all of that. And as I go through that, I can just keep this up to date by automatically syncing. This connection that you see here, you can manually import data or export data, but the idea here is the connection platform will automatically make those synchronizations for you without the end user making that synchronization have to happen. So the idea is you'll get the data that you want as you need it. Now, the same thing would hold true in this particular case. I have a resource plan here that gives me the resources that I need, both from the top down and from the bottom up. So the bottom up resource plan, if I look at, say, Daniel Williams here, I'll see that he's on a number of different tasks in this plan that are rolling up to the overall bottom up plan, and I can do that comparison as I see fit. We haven't talked about timesheets yet, but if there is timesheet data, there's another grid that'll actually show you the actuals as they've come in, and you can do the same comparisons with it as well. So with that, I would just also say, on the financial side of things, if there's costs associated and rates associated with your resources, those resource costs will roll into a financial plan that is based upon the resource planning without you having to duplicate the entry of that information. Now, yes, you could add non-labor resource costs in here if you want to, if you see fit on that. But the idea is that this would come in automatically if you want to do the costing on the resource planning that's in there for yourself. Now, we talked about the actuals a little bit. If I go to the timesheets, this really makes it simple because OnePlan will actually aggregate the data from wherever it came from in your plans, your projects and your schedules, and bring that data into your timesheet in a configurable way. So for example, here, notice I've got some time from an Azure DevOps plan, for some other plans that might have been done just in OnePlan. But notice the project for the web project has some tasks that Daniel Williams here is assigned to, and it gives me the ability to charge time to those particular plans. In this particular case, notice I've charged 2 hours on Monday, and I've got notes of explanation as to what I did for those. So for those places where you're charging back or you're billing people, being able to granularly explain what it is that time was for, that justification may be needed as people question maybe the invoicing and that type of things or the chargebacks that you have. And that gives us the ability to do that. The approval options in here, we have the ability to set up approvers for your timesheets, both project and resource manager approvals. And that when you go to those views, there's a view to approve the time from your individual resources. A project manager can go to the plans that they're responsible for and approve the time for those, or you could look at all of them in a details grid around that. And what's nice about this is I've got 80 hours charged to this timesheet period, and it's telling me that I'm 200% utilized this particular period. So this person is working really hard this week with actuals, not just planned overburdening, but this person is working really hard. Maybe not a realistic piece, but maybe some of us are working that 80 hours in crunch times. Now, if I go back to the resource plan overall that I showed you prior, this resource plan is giving me the aggregate of all this information into a resource plan. In this case, I'm looking at it by business unit, right? And if I go into the resource plan, I could go look at seeing, who's in product development and what resources are working on what across what projects, or even down from the bottom up, what tasks that they're working on. But this also links to a set of Power BI reports that are linked to the OnePlan data, which is derivative from a combination of Project for the Web and the native OnePlan data. So looking at these reports and be able to slice through specific resources and being able to look at something by a particular role or a particular resource. In this case, I'm looking at how we're doing on from a business analyst perspective, or how am I doing from an overall specific resource that's in here and what they're doing. I can get that type of information at any given point in time. I can even get the resource plan details to see what degree resourcing is on each of the projects. More of a heat map of resource plan versus capacity where we're over allocated, and even be able to compare resource plan hours, what's been committed versus bottom up schedule, what's in the timesheets, be able to look at that on a time period basis and even look at that for specific projects or for specific roles. So once again, the reporting becomes a natural output of the overall process. Now, if I go back to the portfolio in here, and I talk about how I marry the portfolio and the prioritization and maybe even the what-if scenario modeling, let's take a look at that. So for example, here, I've got a prioritization view in this portfolio that's got prioritization scores that were driven by how well it aligns and whether or not it lowers costs and how well it aligns with improved employee satisfaction or how it is going to contribute to risk reduction. Those could be your drivers, and those could be contributed to a calculated score based on formulas that are configurable within here. Now, that being said, we may not do things in a strict prioritization score order. You may have your own forced rank on this. And if I put that in place, you'll see that I have a rank from 1 down through whatever number of projects that I have here. And notice that they're not in prioritization order, because I might want to take a project that, say, is ranked number 7 and say, management prerogative, regulatory, whatever it might be, may want maybe to drag that to be up to be number 5. And the idea is I can make these force ranks happen and use this as the basis for my prioritization when I do my what-if analysis and other types of analysis. So in this particular case, let's marry this ranking with a resource-constrained type of analysis for what-if analysis. Now, by going into this mode, I'm actually looking at this from, here's the projects I hope to do. They're all checked at the moment. And this is what it's going to take from a resource perspective, but it looks like I don't have all the resources that I need in order to get this model accomplished. So for example, let's just say I scroll down to the bottom of this to my lowest scored projects. And let's just say for the purposes of this model, I don't want to do the bottom 4 priority items in here. Notice that it freed up some of the red and turned some of it yellow and actually some of it green down below. It changed the model dynamically. And then I could actually save this as a scenario, and I could actually save any number of scenarios that I want to so that I can compare later on. Now, on top of this, instead of just selecting projects, I may have things I want to do. It's just a matter of when I want to do them. So in this particular case, I might take the next 3 items and say, maybe I need to defer these to the next fiscal year. And I delay that one out, and it changed the model. I delay that one out. It changes the picture down below. And I take that one out, and it changes the picture down below again. So the idea is I'm trying to get closer and closer to a model of time phasing and selection of projects that's going to get me to something where I can actually do it. Now, in this particular case, I have a severely overallocated model in this demo environment, but hopefully you saw down here, I made improvements and got a lot more green in here as I went through this process, and I can save these different scenarios as I go through. Now, our modeler capability, oh, by the way, you can look at this from a financial perspective as well. As I want to target and look at our different budgets, I can see, do these things fit within our budget? And lo and behold, for this period, this fits within my $6 million budget with the model that I have here. So that perspective is taken care of. Now, in the modeling perspective, it gives me the ability not to just do what I just showed you there, but also create different sub-models or different categories of models where I may maybe model on a subset of my entire set of projects in here. I might do them by department, or I might do them by program, or I might do them by different disciplines, whatever it might be. But to just show you with one of those things, there is a concept here of an overall model that allows me to determine how many projects I'd like to do. Let me do one other thing before I go there. In selecting those models, I might say, let me add a new model and give it a name. And I might determine with criteria what plans I want to include in the model. For example, I might want to include things and look at them by, I don't know, what portfolio. And I might just say, I want to just do this on the improve customer experience portfolio and add the projects for that, or maybe a couple of these portfolios, or I might want to do it by different programs, etc. I also might want to come in and say, what fields of data, what's going to be my constraint fields that I'm going to use in this, etc. What resource and cost fields I'm going to use for cost type. I'm going to use budget or actuals or forecast. What am I going to use for those types of things? And with that criteria, I'm going to end up with a model. And in this particular case, through the selection process, my candidates number 114 different projects that I would like to do. Now, I can establish different criteria and different targets that I want. In this particular case, let's start with a $20 million budget target that I set out. And when I went through the process, it went through and said, if I, at the end of it, I could only do 80 of that 114 projects, and these were the projects that I had to leave out according to that model. And basically, it said, I can't do everything. And in my prioritization and whittling of this down, with $20 million, I can only do 80 of those projects. I also did a scenario where I had over $25 million in budget. If I could get another $5 million, I could do 93 of these projects instead, and only have a certain number of projects that I can't do, a much fewer number that didn't make the trip. So the good news is that I have alternatives that I can save different scenarios for, and you can save as many of them as you like. Now, if I go to my analyzer and I go to compare these things, I can basically see that for the versus the $25 million budget, that overall they fit within the constraints. But if I got another $5 million of budget of somehow, I could get another $7 million plus in benefit. It might be worth it for me to go do that if I could get that. I want to look at this from a detailed perspective as well and say the difference between the 25 and the $20 million budget, and the comparison will say this is what's in and this is what's out. These are the priorities of those things at that particular point in time. And I could also export this information to Excel for further analysis with other people. There's also dashboards in here that allow you to look at these things from an overall graphical perspective, where I could say, compare that $25 million budget with the $20 million budget. I could also, look at these things in a variety of other ways, like say, a bubble chart, where people are used to that with portfolio analysis, looking at bubble charts and be able to look at different views, where I have things like budget versus benefits and say, here's the benefits and here's the prioritization, where high prioritization, high benefit would be something here in the upper right quadrant, which I still have some good projects up there, but something that might be low priority If it was a high budget, we definitely probably wouldn't do something high budget, low priority. And I could even factor in things like the grayed out plans that weren't in there if I wanted to see what those were and hover on those different items. So once again, we have analysis there that we can do, as well as we haven't talked at all today about strategic alignment, but we have the ability to do strategic alignment and alignment with other things like applications and products and value streams. And we can also take a look here very quickly at, say, dependencies that we might have on these different projects that we're thinking about doing and what else might be needed before or after we do those things. Or we can look at a more complex set of relationships. And let me just zoom this out just a little bit, where I can see very quickly what's related to specific strategies and the key results in those strategies. And for example, if this is a key strategy that's being looked at by leadership, we might want to look very strongly at the projects that are aligned with that to make sure that we do those. And also this red, yellow, green is about the health or the status of those particular projects, so we can understand that maybe where that strategy is in jeopardy by the different projects and plans we have. In this case, they're also aligned with different products that we have in this piece. So once again, a lot of good analysis that we can have in here that factors into prioritization, because if leadership wants this according to a strategic plan, we might want to give an extra weighting to that based upon management prerogative and management vision. All right, so with that, let's go back and let's do a summary and talk about some next steps. So today we talked about how resource management is a critical success factor for PPM success, and that the approach and process should align with the organizational readiness and maturity that you currently have. We talked about how Microsoft has reimagined Project with the new Project for the Web, and Project for the Web provides basic scheduling and resource assignments in collaboration within teams, but OnePlan provides a complete PPM solution built for the Microsoft Cloud, and it can extend Project for the Web with this resource capacity planning, time tracking, and other advanced PPM capabilities. Our OneConnect platform provides easy integration with Project for the Web and potentially other solutions and tools that you might want to work. And just be aware that OnePlan provides not only the solutions, but some services and migration support to ensure your transition to get into a solution like this. So ultimately, Project for the Web plus OnePlan will provide a modern solution for complete portfolio management. Now, resource management next steps, do assess your readiness about to do these things, understand your resource management maturity, and then understand the culture and the environment that you're in. And then build a resource management roadmap that's realistic so that you can do things incrementally that you can sustain over time, and then develop a practical action plan to get there. So define your process first, at least the initial stages, and then we can help you automate that within OnePlan and Project for the Web. We're really passionate about this project and portfolio management discipline. Microsoft has awarded us their Project and Portfolio Management Partner of the Year globally 3 of the last 4 years. And we've also been recognized in this discipline by the analysts like Gartner and Infotech Research. We're not a generalist here. We focus on this discipline. You can trial out the OnePlan pieces. You can go to AppSource and look at the different pieces. I'd highly recommend you try out our strategic portfolio management template that's in there. That's the most fully functional one. And you can reach out to us, and we're happy to chaperone and guide you and support you in that trial process. You could also do a roadmap workshop to help you understand better where that's going to take you, and from where you're at, what it's going to take to get you there. It might be an incremental thing for you on the cost of ownership because you might already own a lot of the tools that you need. So the free trial, the roadmap workshop, please take advantage of those. Or if you just want to engage with us for a more detailed demo that's more tailored to you, on your use cases and your pain points, we're happy to schedule that. Just reach out to us at contact@oneplan.ai. And if you're not even ready for that yet, you can investigate more about these solutions at www.oneplan.ai. So once again, I'd like to thank you for your time in viewing this webinar today. You can reach out to me if you'd like to. You're going to get a copy of these slides, and so you could reach out to me if you'd like to. But our message is really about the power of one. If you've noticed, we brought everything together into one plan and bring it in together to one common place where we can view, we can work with the data, we can report on it, and we can get all the aspects of our project and portfolio and resource management needs that we want in one place. So what we provide is really one interface, one experience, and one platform. And we really do hope you'll engage with us, and hopefully you saw some things in here that intrigued you. Reach out to us. Have a great day.